Thank you so much, Miss Pamela, for that very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to be with you today. I'm blown away by the size of this crowd on a Saturday afternoon after what I know has been a very long and hopefully an incredibly rewarding, inspirational, motivational, and productive day. We have a rule in the governor's office, and that rule is if Pamela asks you to do something, you say yes. You can tell it's very hard to say no to Pamela, and it's been my distinct pleasure over the last 5.5 years serving as lieutenant governor to be able to serve with her as she gives and gives and gives. The governor often refers to her as the Mother Teresa of Utah, and I'm not sure that's fair to Mother Teresa to be compared to Pamela. She's just remarkable, and we're so fortunate to have her here. As Pamela mentioned, it has been a very, very busy time. We are in the middle of a 45-day legislative session. Our legislature only meets for 45 days, one of the shortest legislative sessions anywhere in the country. And thank goodness they don't meet any longer. I love what they do, and I'm glad we do it, and I'm really glad when they go home. So we're looking forward. We just hit the halfway point and looking forward to getting that done. And I've been thinking a lot about what I might be able to say today, and I hope if you believe in the power of prayer that you'll be praying for me, that I'll be able to share with you the thoughts of my heart, and that those thoughts will connect with you. And that in some way you will be inspired. Usually that happens not by anything I say, but by the feelings that you have. And they may be on a completely different topic. It may trigger something inside of you. And I believe those thoughts and feelings come from somewhere else. And I believe in a higher power. I believe that in order to overcome difficulties in our life, in order to overcome trauma, in order to overcome whatever it is that we're facing, we need to believe that there's something more than just us out there. If you believe in a God, I pray to that God, and I know He will help you. If you don't, at least believe that the universe is conspiring in your favor, that there is goodness out there, that there is hope, that there is opportunity that awaits you, that no matter how bright or dark the day is today, that there are brighter days ahead. I believe that, and I know that, and I've seen that in my own life, and I believe that for you. It's amazing to be here in this conference to talk about this subject, to talk about pornography and overcoming pornography. I never expected that someday I would be on a stage having this conversation with a group of people this large, because it's something we didn't talk about at all when I was growing up. And I hope we can get a little uncomfortable with each other today, because I believe that growth comes when we get uncomfortable. I think we have to. I think it's part of it. We get outside of our own comfort zone. That's where we get a chance to improve and grow. And so I'm going to be a little vulnerable with you today. I hope that's okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about vulnerability. But you need to know just a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in the small town of Fairview, as Pamela mentioned. For those of you that don't know where Fairview is, it's in Sanpete County, which, if you don't know where Fairview is, you probably don't know where Sanpete County is either. But if you take a map of the state of Utah and you point right into the middle of that map, you will be pointing at Sanpete County. You may have heard of Manti or Ephraim. Those are the big towns in Sanpete. There are about 1,200 people in Fairview, and we all know each other. Someone asked me, what's the best part about living in Fairview? And I said, family and friends. We all know each other. It's amazing. They said, what's the worst part of living in Fairview? And I said, family and friends. We all know each other. And we know the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that. And my childhood was kind of good. We had challenges. I thought they were normal challenges. At the end of the day, I found out some of those challenges weren't normal. I knew they weren't normal when I was 10 years old, and I found out that my parents were getting divorced. That was a really hard time for me. Very, very difficult. I had two younger siblings. Both of them suffer from a disease called cystic fibrosis, which is a health struggle that adds to the pressure. But there were other issues as well. Interestingly enough, at that time, I went to live with my dad. My brother and sister lived with my mom. We lived about a mile apart, and they didn't like each other very much. But that's the way it was. That's the way our life ended up when I was 10 years old. Because I was living with my dad and he was working, I ended up spending a lot of time with cousins. And we had some cousins that didn't necessarily believe the same things that we did. I had an uncle that was a truck driver. They'd chosen a different life, a life that didn't involve religion, a life that involved alcohol and tobacco and things like that. And it turns out a life that involved pornography for one of my cousins, which I didn't know until I started spending time there. And my cousin said, hey, let's go into my older brother's room. He's got some magazines we need to look at. And that was my first introduction at age 10 to pornography, okay? And like I mentioned, we never talked about it, right? Pornography was a taboo subject you didn't talk about, but I got to see it. And my brain, I know now, was not prepared, did not have the, was not capable of processing those images in a healthy manner. Turns out our brains are never capable of processing those images in a healthy manner, but especially the damage done to young people. And that's where I was at a very young age. And I didn't tell anybody about it. But I knew it wasn't right, and I hated that I had seen it. But every time I had an opportunity to see it again, I did. And I hated that even more. And I started to feel these negative feelings. We call that shame. And I want to talk a little bit about shame today. As I went on, though, I went to middle school shortly thereafter, and I was already struggling with kind of my own self-worth, those feelings of shame. Again, living in a place where a small town, people were talking about why my parents got divorced, rumors that were out there. I didn't know what to believe. I'm a young kid. Very, very difficult. And it turns out I was also a very small kid, and I love sports. But I was very short at the time, and I made up for that lack of height by also being very slow. And it turns out that being short and slow, there aren't really any sports that are excited about somebody that's short and slow. And my eyesight wasn't very good, and my dad went and bought me some glasses, and he picked the biggest glasses I think that we could find, and that didn't help either for a young kid who was already struggling with his own self-worth. I remember the first week in middle school, the kids who were tall and fast decided to see if I would fit in a garbage can, and I did, in the middle of the hall as hundreds of kids were walking by in my middle school. All of those things kind of led me to a very dark place. I remember thinking, in our town, you would go to a graduation or something, and the kids I knew whose parents were divorced, they would read off 2 sets of parents or something, and they were the bad kids always. The bad kids had the divorced parents back in the 80s. So I just assumed I was one of the bad kids at this point, and started thinking that way, hanging out with kids, again, these cousins who weren't real good for me. And I went to a very, very dark place. I started thinking maybe the world would be a better place without me. And as I was thinking, ideating suicide, I was fortunate to find some people who really cared about me. One of those was my stepmom, who came into my life shortly thereafter. I didn't like her, I didn't want to like her, and she didn't care. She loved me anyway, and really changed my life. She accepted me. She met me where I was, and where I was not in a great place, and she had every reason not to. I was the horrible stepson who treated her like garbage, and she loved me anyway. I had some church leaders who changed my life. One person in particular who cared about me, who was my friend, even though he was much, much older than me. He had kids my age. He went out of his way to spend time with me. I didn't realize how abnormal that was at the time, but in retrospect, I recognized that he too saved me. I found some other friends who were good influences on me, and helped me come out of that dark place and realize that life was worth living, that there was hope out there, that there was goodness, and that I could participate in that. Now, I share that with you for lots of reasons, but as I've studied, now let me clarify something first of all. I am not a licensed therapist, okay? You have already heard from people today who know much more than I do on this subject. If I say anything that's different than them, Believe them, not me, okay? Let me be very clear about that. All I know is my own life experiences and some of the things that I've learned and read over the years. And I want to talk more about shame and the impact that shame has on us. I hope if you haven't, you get an opportunity to read some of the research, and she's written books, and she has some great TED Talks, Brené Brown, on the subject of shame and vulnerability. I've learned so much from her in helping to understand my own feelings from an early age, and some of the feelings I've had as I've gotten older, and how the brain develops, and what helps us to overcome addiction, to get us out of those dark places where we sometimes find ourselves. Shame is bad. That's a real technical term. Shame stops us from growing. Okay? She talks a lot about the difference between shame and guilt. I have a grandmother. She doesn't like the word guilt either. She likes the word divine discontent. All right, that's her term. But as Brené Brown talks about the difference between shame and guilt, shame is about who we are as people. Guilt is about behavior. Okay, divine discontent is about behavior. So guilt says that thing you're doing is bad. Shame says you are bad. Right? Guilt is you've made a mistake. Shame says you are a mistake. Okay? Shame holds us back. Shame makes us think that we shouldn't be here. Shame is very, very, very destructive. There are three things, she says, three ways that if you put shame in a petri dish, it grows if it has these three things. Silence. If you have silence, shame grows. Secrecy. If you have secrecy, shame grows. And judgment. If you have judgment, shame grows. That is the recipe for shame, okay? Silence, secrecy, and judgment. So as you can imagine, the way out of shame, okay, is the opposite of those things. Particularly, the antidote to shame is empathy. And we're gonna save empathy for a little while longer. But I want to talk more about what we do to overcome those things. To overcome shame, we have to be willing to be vulnerable. Okay? We have to be willing to look at who we are and the thing that we're doing, and then be willing to attack it. Shame is weakness, and we all have weakness inside of it. Vulnerability, although the world sometimes describes vulnerability as weakness, they're wrong. Vulnerability is courage. Vulnerability is strength. Do we have any Utah Jazz fans out here by chance? Okay, yeah, you're my people. All right. So, and by the way, if you're not a religious person, if you don't have a religion, choose the Utah Jazz. Make them your religion, whatever it is, all right? So some of you saw recently that Rudy Gobert, the star center for the Utah Jazz, unfortunately, and this is a travesty, and I think we should open a legal investigation. I've asked the governor to do this. He did not make the All-Star team. He was not chosen to be on the All-Star team, although by every statistical measure, he was absolutely an All-Star and better than many of the people that were chosen. Rudy Gobert grew up in France, and he grew up a child. He did not a poor child. Did not have a lot of means. He grew very early. He was able to go to these basketball camps. He learned the game of basketball. Became very successful. But at every stage, he was told he was never going to make it in the NBA. And when he finally did make it in the NBA, he was told he would never become a good player, even a starter. And then he became a starter. And he was told, he would never, whatever it is, and he did it. He became Defensive Player of the Year, just incredibly successful. And his goal, he wanted to be an all-star so bad, and he promised his mom someday he would be an all-star. And his mom stays up late at night because of the time difference to watch his games. And everybody thought that he was going to be an all-star this year, and then he wasn't. And he did a press conference after that. And during the press conference, the press was asking him, well, how do you feel? How is it to know that you got snubbed, that you're not an all-star? And he said, it's hard, and he was giving these answers like athletes do. And he said, well, we're just going to have to work harder, and we'll do our best. And then he talked about his mom. And he talked about how disappointed he was to tell his mom that he didn't make it this year. And in the middle of that press conference, this 7'2" behemoth with shoulders this broad and muscles that ripple, he broke down a little bit. And he started to cry, and he kind of stepped away and he composed himself. And you could tell he was just heartbroken. This was a very vulnerable moment for him to share his deep disappointment with the national media. Okay? That's vulnerability. Now, unfortunately, some other players and some other fans of other teams started mocking him for tearing up. Guys don't do that. Tough guys don't cry, right? You don't do that. That's embarrassing. That shows weakness. A lot of people came to his rescue, to his support, and I'm glad they did, because that type of vulnerability is not weakness. That's what we want. We want passion. We want people who care so deeply that it hurts when something bad happens to them. That is strength, that is courage, that is vulnerability. And that's something I've had to learn in my life, that I had to be willing to be vulnerable. I couldn't keep those feelings and thoughts and actions bottled up inside of me because we don't get better that way until we're willing to be vulnerable. And let me just thank you for being so courageous to be here today. Honestly, when this conference started, I thought, no one will ever go. Why would you ever go to a conference like that? What will people think if you go to a conference against pornography? What will people say? Why would anybody ever go to something like that? And I was wrong. And I was wrong because you're willing to be vulnerable. You're willing to come and have these very difficult conversations, these very important conversations. And I salute you for that. So throughout my life, I've learned these lessons. And I want to be clear, I talked about suicide very intentionally. Because what we find, and statistically have shown, is that addiction, whether that addiction is alcohol, whether that addiction is opioids, whether that addiction is pornography, and depression and suicide often go hand in hand. In fact, we try to self-medicate to overcome those feelings, and pornography is one way that many people self-medicate, and that addiction coincides very often with feelings of regret, shame, which then leads to suicide. We've been studying a lot about suicide. We have very high suicide rates in our state. We're a part of what's called the suicide belt, unfortunately, demographically, throughout the Mountain West states, where we are number 5 for suicide rates in our state. And learning how to help other people overcome suicide and suicidal thoughts, it turns out that those same strategies that we use there actually apply to help overcome addiction and pornography. They go hand in hand because we're all looking for the same thing, right? We're all looking for belonging. We're looking for hope. We're looking for that sense of wellness, that sense of well-being, that sense of community that is so critical. So I put empathy to the side just a little bit, and here's the reason why. When I talk to youth groups about suicide or other things, I always explain to them how important it is that they talk to someone when they have those thoughts. And the same thing applies to those of us that have struggled or are struggling with the pornography addiction. We have to find someone that we can talk about. In a room of young people, in a room of 35 young people in our state, by the way, 7 of them have thought about suicide in the last month. Okay, that's a very, very alarming number. So what I tell my young people is, look, I understand that in this room right now, 7 of you have thought about suicide in the last week. And I want you to know that you are not alone, because one of the problems with addiction and suicide is we often think it's just us. We're the only ones. Okay? I hope, again, in a room this size, we realize that we're not alone. Because when we think we're the only ones, those shame gremlins, as she refers to them, those shame gremlins set in. And they try to make us think, again, we're not enough, that we're broken, that something is wrong with us. So I tell them all the time, look, there's nothing wrong with you if you're having those thoughts, those dark thoughts. I had them, okay? And so are others in your class right now. They're having those same thoughts. But here's the thing. We need you, and we need you to talk to someone. You have to find someone. Go to a counselor. go to a parent, go to a friend, go to a teacher, go to someone in your faith, someone you can have a conversation with, because that is, again, vulnerability, being able to share what you're going through, and there is strength in vulnerability, and then having that person there, that trusted friend, who can then show empathy, because empathy is the antidote to shame, okay? Now, by the way, it's incredible when I have those conversations, and I say, if you can't talk to anyone else, please come talk to me. Afterwards, I will have kids come up and say, I'm one of the 7. And then we talk to a professional and we get them help, and we literally save lives. The same thing goes to pornography. If you're the one and you haven't been able to have that conversation yet, find somebody. But then I tell the kids this: if you're not one of the 7 right now, then you know someone who is. And I need you to be the type of person that they will trust so that they can come and talk to. This is where empathy comes in. And this is what we need desperately more of in our state, in our nation right now. People who withhold. Remember one of the 3 things? Secrecy, silence, and judgment, right? We overcome all of those through one vulnerable conversation, because we're speaking. We take away the silence, right? There's no more secrecy because we've shared it with someone, so now it's not a secret. And here's where empathy comes in. We have to remove judgment. It's the thing that we weren't very good at when I was growing up. It's a thing we're probably still not very good at, but it's a thing we need more than ever before. We need an army of people who are trusted, who are willing to be empathetic, who are willing to withhold judgment. Now, for 5 years in my church, I was able to serve in an ecclesiastical position where people came and confided in me. And it was amazing to me. I didn't know what to expect. I was very young. I was 29 at the time when I was asked to serve in this position. And in the first few months, I had people from age 10 to age 70 and everywhere in between come and tell me that they had a pornography addiction or a pornography habit, that they were struggling with pornography. I was blown away at the number of people. I was blown away at the age range of people. And I learned very quickly that I did not need to be judgmental at that time. That's not what they were looking for. And not only that, it was not helpful. In fact, it was harmful, because the minute we cast judgment on that person who is being at their most vulnerable, who is sharing their deepest, darkest secrets, something they're terrified about, something that they're not sure that they should be even sharing. At that moment, if we cast judgment, right, if we criticize them in any way, what happens? They shut up, they go to their dark place, and likely whatever it is they're dealing with will worsen at that time, right? So this is my message. This is what I hope will happen more than anything else, is that we will go out and that we will be that type of person, someone that will learn to show empathy. Now, how do we do that? Sometimes it's hard. I got told some other things that were far worse than pornography, and I would have to check just the look on my face, right? Because sometimes my jaw would fall, and I just wanted to say, what is wrong with you? And I knew that was not what they needed to hear at that time, right? So I would take them by the hand, and I would look them in the eye, and I would say, thank you so very much for being courageous today. This world needs more courage. We all are flawed human beings. We all have problems. Yours might be different than someone else. It may be different than mine, but I love you, and we're going to go through this together. Okay? That's the other thing about empathy. Empathy and sympathy are 2 very different things. Sympathy is, I feel really bad for you. Empathy is, I feel bad with you. Okay? We are going to do this together. I'm going to crawl down into the pit with you. Okay? I'm willing to go there. I'm willing to feel what you're feeling, even though it's super uncomfortable. And even though I would be much better off just laying on the couch and watching the Jazz tonight. But we're here. We're here, and we're in this together. And I'm going to be with you as long as it takes to get out of this. There is an intense power that comes from that type of empathetic relationship. Now, that may come as an adult to a child. It may come as peer-to-peer, as friends. It may come as spouse to spouse, which is where, especially with pornography, those relationships become incredibly tested. I have people very close to me in my family who struggled with pornography. I have a brother and a sister-in-law who have walked down this path together. It was incredibly difficult for them when she found out that my sibling had a pornography addiction and had for years and years. He had been inside of that shame bubble. Secrecy was there, silence was there, never wanted to talk to anybody about it, and worried that the judgment would be there. And he was scared. Finally, he came to the conclusion that he could no longer live that way, and he either had to tell somebody or he had to find another way out of this life. Thankfully, he told someone, and it was so hard and heart-wrenching to see my sister-in-law suffer the way she did. To her credit, she, with some help and some, they saw a therapist. Therapist helped them understand how important this was to work through together. And I'm happy to say that they have been working through this together. And they are so much happier now than they've ever been in their marriage. The things that were holding them back are now gone. There is a new sense of trust, a new sense of hope, a new sense of love that is just powerful and impactful. And I'm so grateful that that is happening to them in their life right now. Now, as you know, I'll put on my government hat for just a minute. In the state of Utah, we have declared pornography a public health crisis. And when that, yes. I remember when Senator Todd Weiler decided that he was going to run this bill, and I know he's participated in this conference before a couple years ago, and he was roundly mocked. Some here at home in the state of Utah, but across the country, everybody thought, this is ridiculous. What is Utah trying to do? Here they are trying to legislate their morals again, trying to make us all be members of the predominant church, and this is hilarious. There's nothing wrong with pornography. And more research is being done on this, and more people are finding out, you know what, there is something to that. It is a public health crisis. And not everyone reacts the same way, but to those that do, it can be as damaging as the opioid crisis that we hear so much about, right? Just because we don't have as many deaths as we're seeing with opioid overdoses, clearly this is not good for people. It's not good for families. It's especially damaging to children. And it can lead to some of those other things that we've talked about, some other addictions as the shame sets in. And so I just want to thank all of you as we wrap this up today. We are so fortunate that we are removing the cover of darkness from this very, very damaging issue, that we are creating safe spaces for people to come to learn more about the power, the negative power of addiction, but more importantly, the power of community, the power of empathy, and the power of vulnerability. I love you for being here today. You give me hope. We have a very unique state, and I hope all of you appreciate that. As I travel around the country, people are talking about Utah in ways they've never talked about us before. Part of that has to do with the economy. There's no question about that. But it's more than that. People come here and they realize there's something special here, and they want that. And it turns out there's actually statistics on this too. It's all about community. There's a wonderful book out there that I recommend to everyone, and I promise I don't get a commission on this. But it's a book that recently came out, and it was written by a U.S. senator from the state of Nebraska. He actually wrote two books, and I recommend both of them. The first one is called The Vanishing American Adult. And it's about children living in a perpetual state of adolescence and not growing up, and how we need to do more of as a country to help our children do hard things and to prepare for adulthood. But the second book he wrote that just came out is called Them, T-H-E-M, Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. And he talks about the political divide in our nation. But it turns out that divide is more than just political. It's socioeconomic as well. It's a divide that's been happening for a long, long time, the haves and the have-nots. Part of that has to do with education, those who get education and those who don't. But as he looks through the data, and by the way, he was a university president, as he looks through the data, what he finds is the reason he believes that we're so far apart is that we are lonelier than ever before. And that didn't make sense at first, but through polling that has been done over time, people have fewer friends that they can trust, that they can talk about, that they can be vulnerable with. In fact, the question is, how many friends do you have with whom you can share your hopes and dreams? Okay? And that number has been going down over the past 20 years. Okay? It's the lowest it's ever been recorded. Right now, we as Americans have fewer people with whom we can share our hopes and dreams than ever before. Now, that didn't make sense because we all have... Oh, I just took off my microphone. We all have these, right? So we're more connected than ever before. I've got thousands of friends. It says they're my friends, and they like things. They push a little button with a heart on it sometimes, right? So those are my friends. It turns out that's not the same thing. Yeah, it turns out those aren't our real friends. And in fact, it turns out that those devices, as he finds from doing his research, are actually doing more damage to us than they're doing good. And there's a whole section about what we can do with our families to better control those phones. But this is important, and this is where I want to finish, and I'll end here. It turns out that community matters. Community matters more than ever before. And what is happening is a destruction in the institutions of community that have kept us together and held us together for so long. So one of those institutions is faith and churches. Right? We, as a society, people are going to church less. They don't have that type of bond that they used to have in their communities, and that's falling apart. Service organizations. So think about the Lions Club and those organizations. If you go to meetings with those service type groups, the Elks Lodge and others, they're graying. They're a little more senior today. You don't see a lot of 20-year-olds hanging out at the Lions Club, right? Doesn't happen anymore. And that's very destructive. He talked about what he calls that Friday evening in a gym feeling. You all remember what that was like, most of you anyway. Excuse me. Friday night, the local basketball team, the high school basketball team is playing, and everyone's there in that gym, right? Everyone shows up, and their crosstown rival or cross-county rival, those Manti Templars in my case, they're on the other side of the gym, right? And everybody's there. And it doesn't, at that point, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, because we're all North Sanpete Hawks or whatever you were, right? And we're in that gym together, and we're having that feeling, and that, it turns out, actually matters. Well, unfortunately, we don't have that feeling nearly as much anymore. We've found ways to segregate ourselves, right? We've found ways to surround ourselves physically by where we live, and through social media with people who are just like us. And it turns out that's not healthy. That's actually not good for us, to just surround ourselves with people who think just like us. See, on Facebook, on social media, I can just unfriend anybody who has an idea that's different than mine, right? I can make sure, and now, we used to just have 3 channels to watch the news on. Now I can pick only the news that I want to hear, the news that sounds just like I think, right? And so we surround ourselves with those voices that are just like us. So what does that have to do with all of this? Well, it turns out it matters because we're lonelier than ever before. We've decided to segment ourselves into tribes. And even if I don't have anybody that's close to me that I live with, I can at least find someone online that hates the same people I do. And that's not a good thing for our country. I believe that that's one of the things that makes Utah different. And it's one of the reasons we're having so much success. I honestly believe that our economic success is directly tied to the fact that we do still have a sense of community, that we do still believe in each other, that we do still come together as Utahns. We lead the nation in charitable giving every year, and there is not a close second. We lead the nation in volunteerism every year, and there is not a close second. Okay? It's when we're volunteering, it's when we're coming together at a conference like this to lift each other up, to help each other out. When somebody is in need, we come. We welcome refugees here, and we help them. We want to help them have a better life. Okay? And when we do those things, political tribalism falls away. And we allow space again to be vulnerable. We allow space to help each other out and lift each other up. But I'm here to issue a word of caution too. We're not that far behind the rest of the country. And if we're not careful, we will find ourselves in very similar situations. And so I will leave you with just this challenge. I implore you, do good, be good, love others. Okay? Be that trusted voice, especially to those who are different than us, especially to those who are struggling, especially to those who are willing to come and have a conversation with us that they might not be willing to have with anyone else. That's how we solve the problem. That's how we solve the divide in our country. And that's how we help and heal hearts. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for letting me be here. God bless you in this great work. Thank you.